Velthar's four eyes blinked in sequence as he watched the human ships emerge from hyperspace. The vessels looked old, their hulls scarred and patched with mismatched metal plates. His antennae twitched with disappointment. These were the warriors everyone whispered about? The species that made the Galactic Council nervous? The observation deck of the Coalition command ship hummed with activity. Officers from a dozen different species moved between stations, their voices creating a symphony of clicks, chirps, and translated speech. Outside the massive viewport, the human fleet hung in space like ancient relics from a forgotten museum. "They look weak," Commander Thesrel said beside him. The reptilian officer's scales rippled with undisguised contempt. Those ships would not survive a single volley from the Haxari. Velthar had to agree, though he kept his mandibles closed. The Haxari swarm had been pushing into Coalition space for 3 years now. Every battle ended the same way. The Haxari brought overwhelming numbers, superior weapons, and a hive mind that coordinated attacks with terrifying precision. Coalition forces fought bravely, died bravely, and lost ground every single time. The war room doors opened with a soft hiss. Velthar turned to see the human delegation enter. 3 of them walked in, wearing uniforms that looked practical but plain. No decorative armor, no ceremonial weapons, just simple gray and blue fabric with patches sewn onto the shoulders. The leader was a man of average height with dark hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His face showed no emotion as he approached the central holographic display. The name badge on his chest read, Captain Dohyun. "Captain," Admiral Korvesh said in greeting, his translator implant converting his native tongue into human language. "Welcome to the Coalition fleet. We are pleased to have human support in this difficult time." Dohyun nodded once. "We are here to help." His voice was flat, almost bored. Velthar found it strange. Most species showed some emotion before battle. Fear, anger, excitement, anything. The humans looked like they were attending a routine meeting. "This is Lieutenant Mireille, my tactical officer," Dohyun continued, gesturing to a woman with sharp features and hair pulled back tight. "And Sergeant Junho, our Marine commander." Junho was broader than the captain, built like a combat frame. He stood with his hands behind his back, eyes scanning the room constantly. Mireille stepped forward and immediately began studying the holographic display of the contested system. Admiral Korvesh activated the star map. Red icons marked Haxari positions. Blue icons showed Coalition forces. The red outnumbered the blue, 3-1. As you can see, the situation is dire. The Haxari control most of the Turthan system. We have defensive positions around Turthan 9, but intelligence suggests they will attack within 48 hours. "What is the standard Coalition defensive formation?" Mireille asked, her fingers moving through the holographic controls with surprising familiarity. Commander Thesisral projected the formation pattern. Ships arranged in a spherical grid, overlapping fields of fire, layered shields. It was a formation tested over centuries of Coalition warfare. Solid, reliably, predictable. Mireille studied it for exactly 10 seconds. "We will not use that formation." The room went silent. Admiral Korvesh's crest rose in surprise. "Lieutenant, this formation has protected Coalition forces for generations. Against Coalition-style enemies," Dohyun said quietly. "The Haxari are not Coalition-style enemies." "What do you propose?" Velthar found himself asking, his curiosity overcoming his hesitation. Dohyun looked at him directly. Those dark eyes seemed to look through him, rather than at him. "We need full tactical autonomy. My ships will operate independently from the main fleet." "That is suicide," Thesral hissed. "The Haxari will isolate and destroy your vessels one by one. It's some... well, perhaps," Dohyun said. His expression did not change. Junho smiled then, just a slight curve of his mouth. It was not a friendly smile. "We would like to review the enemy's previous attack patterns." All of them. The meeting continued for another hour. The humans asked strange questions. They wanted to know psychological profiles of HFY commanders. They asked about supply line vulnerabilities. They studied past battles not to see how the HFY won, but to see how they moved, how they communicated, how they thought. When the meeting ended, Admiral Corvesh reluctantly approved the human request for tactical autonomy. "I hope you know what you are doing, Captain." "So do we," Do-hyun replied. And Velthar could not tell if it was a joke or not. Later, Velthar watched from the observation deck as the human fleet began moving into position. Other coalition officers stood nearby, their conversations filled with doubt. "They will die quickly," one officer muttered. "At least they volunteered," another replied. But Velthar noticed something strange. The human ships were not moving into defensive positions. They were spreading out, moving to unexpected locations around the system, and then, one by one, they went silent. No communications, no active sensors. They simply disappeared into the darkness of space. It was completely against every military doctrine Velthar had ever studied. Ships needed coordination. They needed constant communication. They needed to know where their allies were. The humans had done the opposite. They had scattered into the void and gone dark. Velthar pressed his foremost appendage against the cool viewport. In 48 hours, the HFY would arrive. In 48 hours, he would see if the whispers about humanity were true. His antennae twitched again, but this time not with disappointment, with something else. Something he had not felt in 3 years of losing battles. Anticipation. The humans were either brilliant or insane. Possibly both. And Velthar realized he desperately wanted to see which one it was. The HFY arrived exactly when intelligence predicted. Velthar watched from his observation station as reality tore open and the enemy fleet poured through. 200 ships. Maybe more. Their organic vessels looked like massive insects. Chitin hulls, gleaming with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in unison. The hive mind, coordinating every movement. Coalition forces numbered only 40 ships. Even with the human contingent of 12 vessels, they were badly outnumbered. The sense of Hasnodi versated. The sense of Tenshiv, all ships, assume defensive formation Beta 7, Admiral Corvesh commanded. His voice was steady despite the impossible odds. Coalition vessels moved into position around Turthan 9, shields overlapping, weapons charging. It was a good formation. It would buy the colony below a few extra hours to evacuate, maybe a day if they were lucky. Velthar pulled up the tactical display showing human positions. Or rather, where human positions should have been. The screen showed nothing. The human ships were still dark, still silent. "Where are they?" Commander Thesral demanded. The humans were supposed to reinforce the left flank. No answer came. The HFY fleet advanced, their ships moving in perfect coordination. They began their standard attack pattern. Waves of smaller craft, preparing to overwhelm the coalition shields, while the larger vessels moved into bombardment range. Then something strange happened. A HFY supply ship at the rear of their formation simply exploded. No warning. No visible attacker. It just came apart in a ball of flame and debris. Seconds later, 3 more supply ships died the same way. The HFY formation rippled with confusion. Their hive mind was trying to process an attack from an unexpected direction. The main swarm hesitated for just a moment. That was when Velthar's console lit up with human signals. All 12 human ships appeared on sensors simultaneously, but they were not where anyone expected. They had somehow moved behind the HFY fleet, deep in enemy territory, and they were tearing through the supply line like predators through a herd. Impossible. Thesral breathed. How did they get there? Without being detected, Velthar studied the tactical data. The humans had not used any special stealth technology. They had simply gone completely dark, let the HFY fleet pass them, and then struck from behind. It was so simple, it was stupid. Or brilliant. Maybe both. The Haxari swarm split. Half continued toward the coalition defensive position. The other half turned to deal with the human raiders. This should have been a disaster. Divided attention meant divided forces. The humans would be crushed. But the humans did not fight the way coalition forces fought. They did not form neat lines or coordinate overlapping fields of fire. They scattered again, each ship moving independently, attacking different targets, retreating in random directions. It looked like chaos. Organized chaos. Coalition forces, advance. Do-hyun's voice crackled over the communication network. Push while they are confused. Admiral Korvesh hesitated only a moment. All ships, forward, weapons free. The coalition fleet broke formation and charged. It went against every defensive doctrine, but the opportunity was too good to waste. The Haxari found themselves caught between two forces, unable to fully coordinate their hive mind's response. Then Velthar saw something that made his blood run cold. Human transport pods were launching from Sergeant Junho's ship. Small, armored capsules, hurtling directly toward the largest Haxari vessel. The pods were barely big enough for a single soldier, with no shields, no weapons, no maneuvering thrusters. They were just metal coffins being thrown into space. "What are they doing?" Velthar whispered. The pods slammed into the Haxari ship's hull. Some shattered on impact, but others, maybe half, attached themselves to the organic armor. Breaching charges detonated. Holes appeared in the Haxari ship, and through those holes, human soldiers poured inside. Velthar had never seen anything like it. Boarding actions were considered suicide against the Haxari. Their ships were filled with warrior forms, combat organisms designed specifically for close-quarters fighting. Sending troops inside was sending them to certain death. But the humans were doing it anyway. Lieutenant Mireille's voice came over the open channel, and Velthar realized she was broadcasting on frequencies the Haxari could hear. Music started playing. Strange human music, loud and aggressive, with pounding rhythms and distorted sounds. Mixed with the music were false commands in Haxari communication patterns, contradictory orders, nonsense signals, psychological warfare. One of the coalition intelligence officers said with awe, "They are trying to disrupt the hive mind's cohesion." It was working. The Haxari formation became more erratic. Ships started making mistakes, colliding with each other, firing at the wrong targets. The hive mind was still coordinated, but it was confused, distracted, angry. The battle raged for hours. Velthar watched as human ships took damage that should have destroyed them but kept fighting. One human vessel lost half its hull but continued firing with its remaining weapons. Another ship lost engine power and used maneuvering thrusters to ram a Haxari cruiser, both vessels exploding in a brilliant flash. Through it all, Junho's Marines fought inside the enemy vessels. Velthar could not see what was happening in there, but he could see the results. Haxari ships going dark. Internal explosions. Vessels drifting out of formation as their crew was killed or their systems were sabotaged. 36 hours after the battle started, the Haxari retreated. Not destroyed. Not defeated completely. But they retreated. Something they never did. Something they were not supposed to be able to do against a numerically inferior force. Coalition forces were too exhausted to pursue. Human ships limped back to formation, trailing debris and atmosphere. Junho's transport docked with the command ship, and Velthar went to the hangar bay to see the Marines return. 40 soldiers had launched in those pods. 19 came back. They walked off the transport, covered in purple Haxari blood and their own red blood. Their armor scorched and broken. Some had to be carried by their comrades, but they were alive. Junho was the last one off. He had a deep cut across his forehead, and his left arm hung at a strange angle. But he stood straight and saluted Captain Do-hyun, who had come down to meet them. "Mission complete, sir," Junho said. "Target vessel neutralized." Do-hyun returned the salute. "Good work, Sergeant. Get to medical. After debriefing, sir." Velthar approached them slowly. Both humans looked at him with those flat, unreadable expressions. That was... Velthar struggled for words. That was not how battles are fought. Do-hyun's face remained neutral. No. That is how wars are won. He paused, then added something that Velthar would remember forever. We did not win today. We just made them afraid to lose. As the humans moved past him toward medical, Velthar realized something terrifying. They had been fighting for 36 hours straight. No sleep, no rest, just constant combat. And they treated it like a normal day. What kind of species could do that? What kind of species would do that? The coalition leadership called it a tactical victory. Admiral Korvesh held a ceremony honoring the human contingent. Medals were awarded. Speeches were made. But in the private chambers of the command ship, Velthar heard the real conversations. They are dangerous, one ambassador whispered. They are effective, another countered. They are both, a third concluded, and no one disagreed. Velthar spent the next 3 days trying to understand what he had witnessed. He reviewed battle recordings frame by frame. He studied human tactics, but numbers and data did not explain the truth he was searching for. So he decided to ask the humans themselves. He found Corporal Hagen in the medical bay. She was a combat medic, one of the 19 who had survived the boarding action. She sat on a hospital bed. She was prom, her leg in a regeneration cast, calmly reading something on a datapad. May I speak with you? Velthar asked, his translator making his clicks and chirps into human speech. Hagen looked up and smiled. It was a warm smile, not the cold expression Captain Do-hyun wore. Sure. Have a seat. Velthar settled onto a nearby chair, adjusting his limbs for comfort. I want to understand. Why did you board that ship? You knew most of you would die. Most of us did not die. Hagen corrected gently. 19 out of 40 survived. That is almost half. That is a terrible survival rate. Is it? Hagen tilted her head. In our military history, we have operations where survival rates were much lower. Sometimes 5%. Sometimes less. Sometimes the mission was specifically designed so that no one would come back. Velthar felt his antennae droop with shock. That is horrific. It is war, Hagen said simply. She went back to her datapad. War is always horrific. We just accept it and do what needs to be done. That evening, Velthar accessed the human database. He had clearance to review their historical records as part of his role as coalition observer. What he found in those files kept him awake for 2 full sleep cycles. Humans had been fighting wars for their entire recorded history. Not occasional conflicts like most species, not rare territorial disputes. Constant, unending warfare. Wars over religion. Wars over resources. Wars over ideas. Wars over insults. Sometimes they fought aliens, but mostly they fought each other. The numbers were incomprehensible. The First World War, 60 million dead. The Second World War, over 100 million. And those were just 2 conflicts out of thousands. Humans had killed more of their own species than the Haxari had killed of all coalition species combined. Velthar read about tactics that made his stomach turn. Scorched earth policies. Total war. Mutually assured destruction. Humans had developed weapons that could destroy their entire planet, built thousands of them, and aimed them at themselves. They had lived with the possibility of complete extinction for generations and just accepted it as normal. Other species had evolved past their violent phases. The Kryn, Velthar's people, had not had a war in 3,000 years. Most coalition species were similar. War was ancient history. Something that happened before civilization truly developed. But humans had never stopped. They had taken warfare and turned it into an art form. They studied it. They theorized about it. They wrote books and taught classes and built entire institutions dedicated to understanding how to kill more efficiently. The realization hit Velthar like a physical blow. The coalition had not recruited allies. They had invited predators to the table. The next day, he met with engineer Taejun in one of the human ship's maintenance bays. The engineer was welding a patch onto a damaged hull section. Sparks flying around his protective gear. "Your ships," Velthar said when Taejun finished and removed his helmet. "They use old technology. Simple systems." "Why?" Taejun wiped sweat from his forehead and smiled. "Because simple things do not break as easily. And when they do break, we can fix them with basic tools." He gestured at the patch. "This repair will not be pretty, but it will hold. An advanced self-repairing hull would be better, sure. But what happens when the self-repair system breaks? Then you have a broken hull and a broken repair system. You expect things to break," Velthar said slowly. "We expect everything to break." Taejun confirmed. "We expect everything to go wrong. So we prepare for that. We design systems that can fail and still work. We train soldiers to fight when their weapons malfunction. We plan missions assuming half our equipment will be destroyed." He picked up his welding torch again. "Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. That is the human way." A week after the battle, Captain Do-hyun requested a meeting with coalition leadership. Velthar attended as an observer, his role in recording and analyzing human integration into coalition forces. Lieutenant Mireille presented their proposal on the holographic display. It showed a deep strike mission into Haksari core territory, targeting their primary hive worlds. The room erupted in protest. "Suicide," Commander Thesrel hissed. "Impossible," another officer declared. "Insane," a third added. Admiral Korvesh raised a hand for silence. "Captain Do-hyun, you must understand. No coalition force has ever penetrated that deep into Haksari space. The defenses are too strong. You would be detected and destroyed before reaching your target." "Yes," Do-hyun agreed. "Unless we use their own signals against them." Lieutenant Mireille has been studying Haksari communication patterns. "We believe we can disguise our fleet as a retreating Haksari force." "For how long?" the admiral asked. "Long enough," Mireille said. Her confidence was absolute. The debate went on for hours. In the end, it was not Do-hyun's arguments that convinced them. It was the simple fact that the coalition was losing. Slowly but certainly, the Haksari were winning. Conventional tactics had failed for 3 years. Maybe it was time to try something unconventional. "My entire contingent volunteers," Do-hyun said. "We understand the risks. I will accompany the mission," Velthar heard himself say. Everyone turned to look at him, as an observer, to document what happens. Admiral Korvesh studied him for a long moment. "Very well. May the stars guide you all." That night, as the human fleet prepared to depart, Velthar watched Sergeant Junho's Marines in their barracks. They were checking weapons, writing letters on old-fashioned paper, sitting quietly with their thoughts. Some prayed to human gods. Others simply stared at nothing. They knew they might not come back. They had volunteered anyway. Velthar finally understood what he was seeing. These were not brave soldiers. Bravery implied a lack of fear. The humans were afraid. He could see it in the small gestures, the careful way they maintained their equipment, the letters they wrote to families they might never see again. But they were going anyway. Not because they were unafraid. Because something had to be done. And they had decided they would be the ones to do it. It was the most terrifying thing Velthar had ever witnessed. The hyperspace jump took 6 hours. Velthar spent most of that time in his assigned quarters, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He had never been this deep in enemy territory before. No coalition observer had. If they were discovered before reaching the target, there would be no rescue, no backup, just death in the cold darkness of space. When they emerged from hyperspace, Velthar immediately went to the bridge. Captain Do-hyun stood at the command station, his face as unreadable as ever. Lieutenant Mireille worked at the communications console, her fingers moving across controls with practiced precision. HFY patrol detected, the sensor officer reported. 3 cruisers, approaching from coordinates 77 Mark III. Transmit the captured signals, Do-hyun ordered. Make us look like we are running from a coalition attack. Mireille's hands danced across her console. The human ships broadcast signals that Velthar's translator identified as HFY. Distress calls, retreat orders, damage reports. The signals were perfect mimicries, recorded during previous battles, and carefully reconstructed. The HFY patrol came closer. Velthar held his breath. If the deception failed now, they would all die here. Then the patrol changed course. They moved away, their formation shifting to cover what they thought was a retreating friendly force. The hive mind had accepted the false signals. We are through the outer perimeter, Mireille reported, proceeding to the hive world. The journey to the surface took another 8 hours. They passed dozens of HFY vessels, each time broadcasting false signals, each time being accepted as one of their own. Velthar watched in amazement as Lieutenant Jiwan, the intelligence officer, coordinated the entire deception. She had spent weeks learning HFY communication patterns, understanding their hive mind's decision-making processes. Now she was essentially speaking their language, telling them exactly what they expected to hear. When they reached orbit around the primary hive world, Sergeant Junho's infiltration team prepared for deployment. Velthar had volunteered to accompany them, though he was beginning to question that decision. The team consisted of 12 soldiers, plus Corporal Heijin, and himself. Their mission was simple in theory: reach the Queen's communication nexus and destroy it. Without the nexus, the hive mind would fracture, losing its ability to coordinate across star systems. In practice, the mission meant walking into the heart of a HFY hive and somehow surviving long enough to complete the objective. The dropship descended through the organic atmosphere of the hive world. Everything here was alive. The ground itself pulsed with bioluminescence. Structures grew from the living earth like massive tumors. And everywhere, were HFY warrior forms patrolling their home world. They landed in a canyon 3 kilometers from the nexus. The moment the doors opened, Velthar smelled the thick, sweet scent of HFY biology. It made him want to vomit. Move quiet. Move fast, Junho whispered. Standard guerrilla formation. If we are separated, rally point is the ship. The team moved through the alien landscape like ghosts. Velthar struggled to keep up. His 4 legs were not designed for this kind of terrain. Heijin stayed close to him, ready to help if he fell behind. They encountered their first HFY patrol after 20 minutes. 4 warrior forms, each 3 meters tall, covered in natural armor, carrying bioweapon symbiotes. Junho made a hand signal. The team spread out, taking positions behind organic rock formations. The ambush was over in seconds. Silent weapons fired, precise shots to vulnerable points that Mireille's intelligence had identified. All 4 HFY fell before they could send a warning. Keep moving, Junho ordered. They moved, through valleys of living tissue, past pulsing organic structures, around pools of biochemical fluids. Velthar realized the humans had trained for this. They knew how to move in alien environments, how to navigate hostile territory, how to stay hidden when stealth was needed, and strike fast when violence was necessary. It took 2 hours to reach the nexus. The structure rose from the ground like a massive brain, pulsing with electrical activity. It was beautiful, in a horrible way, and it was guarded by at least 50 HFY warriors. We cannot fight through that many, Velthar whispered. Junho studied the situation through his visor. No, but we can make them come to us. He tapped his communicator. Captain, we need a distraction. Something loud. Confirmed, Do-hyun's voice crackled back. Stand by. 5 minutes later, explosions lit up the sky. Human ships in orbit were firing on military targets on the other side of the planet. The HFY guards around the nexus received orders from the hive mind. Most of them rushed away to defend against the orbital attack. Only 15 guards remained. "Now we fight," Junho said, and the team moved. The battle was brutal and fast. Human weapons roared. Haxari bioweapons sprayed acid and toxins. Velthar stayed behind cover, watching as Heijin ran between wounded soldiers, applying emergency treatments, while shots flew around her. One Marine fell, his arm nearly severed by a Haxari claw. Heijin dragged him to safety, sealed the wound with medical gel, and then picked up his weapon and continued fighting. They reached the Nexus. Engineer Taejun ran forward with explosive charges, while the others provided covering fire. He placed the charges with quick, efficient movements, then ran back. "Fire in the hole," he yelled. The explosion should have destroyed the Nexus, but as the smoke cleared, Velthar's heart sank. The organic structure had regenerated, its biomatter flowing back together to seal the damage. "It is alive," Heijin said. "It is healing itself. Then we use more explosives," Junho said calmly. He looked at Taejun. "How much do we have?" Quote, 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 "Enough to level a city block," Taejun replied. "But if we use all of it here, we will be in the blast radius." Junho was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then, he made a decision that Velthar would never forget. "Set the charges. Full payload." He tapped his communicator. "Captain, we need orbital fire on our position in exactly 10 minutes. Sergeant, that will destroy everything in a 5-kilometer radius." Do-hyun's voice came back. "I know. We will be underground by then. I hope." Junho looked at his team. "There is a maintenance tunnel system beneath us. We get down there, seal ourselves in the deepest chamber, and wait for the orbital strike to flatten everything above us." "That is insane," Velthar said. "Yes," Junho agreed. He started moving toward a tunnel entrance they had identified earlier. "Let us go." The next 10 minutes were chaos. They fought through Haxari defenders, pouring back toward the Nexus. They descended into dark tunnels, filled with organic pipes and flowing chemicals. They found a reinforced chamber deep underground and sealed the entrance with welded metal plates that Taejun had somehow prepared in advance. Then they waited. Velthar counted the seconds. When the orbital strike hit, the entire world shook. The walls cracked. Chemicals sprayed from broken pipes. The sound was like reality itself screaming, but the chamber held. They survived. When they finally emerged hours later, the Nexus was gone. The entire area was a smoking crater. Haxari were everywhere, but they moved without coordination. The hive mind was fractured, confused, unable to give coherent orders. "Extraction point is 12 kilometers north," Junho said, checking his equipment. "We walk." They walked. Through enemy territory, past Haxari, who were too confused to organize a proper pursuit. Heijin treated their wounds as they moved. Taejun kept their damaged equipment working with repairs that should not have been possible. The dropship was waiting. Engineer Taejun coaxed it into flight, despite damage to its engines. They reached orbit. They rejoined the fleet. They had done the impossible. As they entered hyperspace for the journey home, Velthar found Junho in the medical bay, being treated for burns and lacerations. "Why were you not afraid?" Velthar asked. "When you called down the orbital strike on our position?" Junho thought about it for a moment. "Fear is just information. It tells you what matters. Then, you act anyway." Simple words. But in them, Velthar finally understood the nature of humanity. The destruction of the communication nexus changed everything. Within 3 days, the Haxari swarm sent communication signals requesting negotiation. Within a week, preliminary peace talks began. Within a month, the war that had raged for 3 years was over, not with total victory, not with the Haxari completely defeated, but with an exhausted stalemate that both sides could accept. Territory was exchanged. Borders were established. An uneasy peace settled over the contested regions of space. The coalition celebrated humanity as heroes. Parades were held. Monuments were commissioned. Human soldiers were honored across a dozen worlds. Captain Do-hyun received the coalition's highest military decoration. Sergeant Junho, Lieutenant Mireille, and the rest of the human contingent became famous throughout coalition space. But Velthar saw something beneath the celebrations. He saw the way other species looked at the humans now. The respect was there. Yes, the gratitude was genuine. But there was something else in those looks. Something that made Velthar's antennae twitch with recognition. Fear. He returned to his home world to write his official report. The Kryn Council wanted a detailed analysis of human military capabilities, their integration into coalition forces, their effectiveness as allies. Velthar wrote that report. It was professional, thorough, and completely factual. He submitted it to the proper authorities and received their thanks. Then he wrote another report. A private one. For himself. He sat in his dwelling, looking out at the peaceful gardens of his city, and he wrote the truth. The humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. The Kryn were stronger. The humans were not the fastest. The Velkar could move faster. They were not the smartest. Several species had higher average intelligence scores. They did not have the best technology. Their ships were old and patched. Their weapons were simple. Their equipment was basic, but none of that mattered. What made humans terrifying was something deeper, something fundamental to their nature. They never gave up. Ever. No matter how bad the situation became, no matter how many died, no matter how impossible the odds, humans simply refused to accept defeat. Velthar had seen it firsthand. Human soldiers fighting for 36 hours without rest. Marines boarding enemy ships, knowing most would not return. Engineers keeping broken equipment working through improvisation and sheer stubbornness. Medics treating wounded soldiers while under fire. Officers calling orbital strikes on their own positions, and somehow surviving. They did not do these things because they were brave. Velthar understood that now. They did these things because they believed someone had to. And they had decided that someone would be them. They had made peace with the cost of violence in a way that other species could not comprehend. Most species fought for territory or resources or survival. Humans fought for those things too. But they also fought for ideas, for principles, for people they had never met. They fought because someone needed protecting, because something needed defending, because a line needed holding, and they were willing to pay any price to win. Velthar wrote about the human casualties. 2,347 dead, over 6,000 wounded, ships destroyed, equipment lost. The humans had held a ceremony honoring their fallen. Every name was read aloud. Every life was acknowledged. And then they went back to work, ready to fight again if needed. Other species would have been broken by those losses. The humans treated them as the expected cost of war. There was a knock at Velthar's door. He put down his writing instrument and opened it to find Captain Do-hyun standing outside, dressed in a simple civilian outfit. "May I come in?" Do-hyun asked. Velthar gestured him inside. They sat in the traditional Kryn manner, on cushions around a low table. Velthar prepared tea, the ritual giving him time to gather his thoughts. "I am leaving tomorrow," Do-hyun said, returning to human space. "I wanted to say goodbye." "I am glad you came," Velthar replied honestly. They sat in silence for a moment, drinking tea. Finally, Velthar spoke. "May I ask you something? A personal question?" "Of course. Were you afraid? During the mission to the Hive world?" Do-hyun looked out the window at the peaceful garden. Every moment. Of every day. The admission surprised Velthar. "Showing fear does not help anyone," Do-hyun said simply. "My soldiers were afraid. They needed someone who appeared calm. So, I appeared calm." He set down his teacup. "That is what leadership means. carrying the fear so others do not have to. Is that what all humans believe? Most of us. Do-hyun smiled, just slightly. We are not special, Velthar. We are not naturally brave or naturally strong. We just learned, over thousands of years of fighting, that someone has to stand in the gap. Someone has to hold the line. Someone has to do the hard things. He paused. We are not brave. We are just too stubborn to quit. After Do-hyun left, Velthar returned to his writing. He wrote about his final thoughts on humanity and their place in the coalition. 3 months later, Velthar stood before the Coalition Council to give his official testimony regarding human integration into coalition military forces. The chamber was filled with representatives from 40 species, all waiting to hear his analysis. The humans are effective warriors, Velthar began. They broke the Haxari momentum and forced a peace we desperately needed. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. But I must also report that humanity represents a significant concern moving forward. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. They are not cruel, Velthar continued. They are not evil. They follow the rules of war as best they can. They show mercy when possible and honor their enemies. He looked around the chamber. But they are also completely committed to victory in ways that other species are not. They will sacrifice anything to achieve their objectives. They will endure losses that would break other militaries. They will use tactics that we consider unthinkable. Admiral Corvesh spoke up. Are you recommending we exclude humanity from coalition forces? No, Velthar said immediately. I am recommending we understand exactly what we have invited into our alliance. Humanity is the most effective military force in the known galaxy. Not because they are superior warriors, but because they have never stopped being warriors. Every other species evolved past constant warfare. Humans refined it. The debate that followed lasted for days. Some council members wanted humans as a permanent military force. Others wanted strict limitations on human involvement. Some were grateful. Some were terrified. All were conflicted. In the end, the Council voted to maintain the alliance with humanity, but with careful oversight and clear rules of engagement. Human forces would defend coalition space, but under coalition authority, Velthar watched the vote happen and wondered if rules would really matter. If another crisis came, if another war began, the coalition would call on humanity again. They would have no choice. And humans would answer, because that was what humans did. 6 months after his testimony, Velthar received a message. The human contingent had been deployed to the coalition border to patrol against pirates and raiders. Already, reports were coming back of pirates surrendering without a fight when they detected human ships. The mere presence of humans was enough to maintain order. Velthar saved the report and added it to his private files. Then he looked out at his peaceful city and thought about the universe beyond. The coalition had spent 3 years losing a war. Humanity had arrived and ended it in months. They had done exactly what the coalition asked them to do. They had protected those who needed protecting. They had held the line when others could not. But Velthar understood something that many of his fellow council members did not. The reason every species dreaded humanity was not because of what they did in war. It was because they were always ready for war. Other species hoped for peace and prepared reluctantly for conflict. Humans hoped for peace, but expected war. They built their entire civilization around the assumption that violence was inevitable, and they prepared accordingly. That preparation, that eternal readiness, that refusal to ever be truly at peace, that was what made them terrifying. Velthar finished his tea and returned to his writing. His private journal had grown quite large. Perhaps someday he would publish it. Perhaps not. For now, he simply wrote the truth, as he understood it. I finally understand why every species dreads them. It is not what they do in war. It is that they are always ready for it. They have made peace with violence in a way we cannot comprehend. They have accepted the cost of conflict as simply the price of existing. And when they fight with everything they have, holding nothing back, accepting no compromise, pursuing victory with absolute commitment. He paused, his writing appendage hovering over the page. We invited them to fight for us. They did. Now we must live with what we have unleashed. Warriors who will never stop being warriors. Protectors who are also predators. Allies we need but cannot fully trust. Not because they are dishonest, but because they are so very, very good at what they do. Velthar set down his writing instrument and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, human ships patrolled coalition space. Somewhere out there, human soldiers stood ready, waiting, always waiting. And he realized that this peace they now enjoyed had not come from diplomacy or negotiation or mutual understanding. It had come because the galaxy's predators now had something they feared more than each other. They had humanity, and that fear, that terrible, necessary fear, was the foundation of their new peace.